Hi guys, welcome to the second part of the Warhound Titan build. Body intro and cleanup. So in this video I want to talk about the overall material and give you some tips how to pursue that. So we will talk about these big chunks here. These are the the engine blocks with the exhaust, and you see this huge chunk of resin at the end. And yes, you have to cut this overall big block entirely to adjust the exhaust ports. The centerpiece, you see here some resin residues. Overall, no real slips, mold lines in the interior. Good quality. I'm pleasantly surprised. And you see a lot of pieces here. Center carapace piece, some mold lines at the beginning, and especially here in the middle, a thin layer of resin. You have to cut these two foil thin parts to adjust to put in the metal part, which you will find later. The most complicated part in this build is the leg part, also including the foot. You see here some quite big mold lines, but nothing you can't handle. There are also some details here, like the Imperial Eagle here. These are the hip connectors, and you see a few of these are already broken, and honestly many are broken inside the bag already. So I'm not quite happy about that, but I will find a way to make this happen. The princeps, pretty decent print or cast. You don't have to remove the plate, but of course the part in the below that. These are the toes. They are different parts, 3 different in total. Also quite okay from the quality. Here on the joints you see some mold lines. I definitely have to do some intense sanding. The leg parts are also okay from the diameter of the joints, and you can try to use a mold line scraper or hobby knives, filing tools, sanding tools, whatever you do. And you can see here, I just want to show you, you can scrape off using the Games Workshop mold line scraper, but I'm not a particular fan of that. It jumps in resin because it's much harder than plastic, and you really carve in some edges and some dents. So I very rarely use the mold line scraper for resin. So the majority of the time I use my standard files to get rid of these. They come in different size and shape, so you can easily find for, I would say, like 10 to 15 euro a decent set of files. These have been a little bit more expensive. There are some diamond files, but you won't really use that. So you can also try to do this with a hobby knife, but that's something I would not really recommend. You can just cut, but never scrape, because the blade is too flexible, and it would also jump and cut into your resin on places you really don't want to have any more dents and scratches in. So summary: saw, file, that will help you. Everything else you don't really need. Here you have to remove the sides of this big resin block as well, and to file that accordingly to fit neatly into the joint from the other recording part. So as presented before, with these sets you usually have enough variety. Here a very flat one. I will give this a very thorough sanding, or take them via a sanding process, to really have a smooth surface. And as you can see here, I'm very careful with the angle. Do not move around, so you will always round the edges, and this will look terrible later. So always keep the right angle when you file the parts. Do not curve around and demolish your nice edges of your models. That's very important, and especially if you are in a rush and you file like a maniac, you will more or less round your edge. You don't want that. I tend to use some rough coarse filing for the inside of joints where I want to create a little bit of a rough surface area for the glue to attach. You can even scrape and scratch these parts with a hobby knife, but take care that it's not visible in the final assembly. So I would recommend do a test fit first, what's visible, and then decide if you can really scratch and create the surface you need. I will mention this multiple times. Check the assembly manual. Sometimes you think this is just like a holding part of resin for the general piece, but sometimes it's part of the model itself. And especially with the toes, I accidentally cut the pins fitting into the, well, let's call it the centerpiece of the foot. So I had to drill pins as well. I think the margin for error is quite low here. Just be careful. Here you have these knee piston parts, which will definitely fit in there. I'm checking here what's part of the model, how is it fitting together, not to make the mistake that I'm taking away too much material I will later use. The knee piston part 2 and the knee piston part 1, they will also stabilize the leg. The leg has 2 joints to give us this wolfish posture, and you have two joints, which makes the test fit difficult. But especially with the piston part 2, it creates stability, and you can adjust the angle to a certain extent, and even without pinning. But pinning is something I will discuss later with you. So again, I use my standard Games Workshop saw. I call it the Games Workshop saw because it's a standard wood saw for basic small pieces of wood, or a jeweler's saw, at least that's called in German, eine Juweliersäge. So you can find this for $10 on Amazon. So here I try to stay close to the joint. I saw the piece. I'm not using the nippers as mentioned in the first video, because sometimes it will demolish the other parts of the resin due to the sheer force of breaking parts of it. On the front side you have one piston. On the one side, front side you have 2 pistons. I'm sorry. On the back side you have 1 piston. There is some flexibility here. You can adjust the angle, and the pieces are fitting together quite nicely. So you could theoretically try to position this without pins or blue tack or whatever you can use, but I will pin all joints later to have the ability to find a great posture, or the posture I want for my model. It's maybe not a great posture, but my aim is to create a stepping motion instead of a standing position. So here in this part, the piston 1 will fit. I'm just looking at different parts here and already thinking how I can assemble the whole model. Take your time and create little backs of the individual pieces, so it's easier for you later to assemble the model. There are also smaller size models with more parts, and the big parts here, the big chunks, are making the making quite easy to work with. Nonetheless, especially hip joints, the pistons for the toes, towards the, I call it the shin bone, are quite extensive. You have 4, 8, so 16 in total, plus hip joints and hip stabilizers. So you don't want to miss parts. Yeah. So here, these are the toes. Be a little bit careful at the tip of the toe to not cut into the trim. But also here the slips and the mold lines are quite well are minimal. So the toes are the tips of the toes are different here. You have 2 of the same style. You can identify this with the logo. So you have this the back part, which is different. You have the 2 on the side, which are the same, and you have a bigger, I call it the front toe, for the third toe, which is larger. So take care that you glue them together correctly. The in-between sections, so the joints of the toe, are the same. So you cannot really make a huge mistake unless you glue this to the centerpiece of the foot first. So take your time, especially with the foot. I will speed this process up in the future videos, but my intention was to make this video available for beginners as well, who wants to tackle such a big model. So you see me really doing stuff in real time, instead of always jumping from one finished part to the next one. I think this is the longest video in the whole series. And the other ones are shorter and more condensed. Yeah. But I will speed this up in a few seconds. The centerpiece is something which is closing the metal insert. I see this in another video. The metal insert to the carapace, the central armoring position. Be careful with that piece. Don't glue it together if you want to paint it. Otherwise, you cannot reach the cabley stuff. So this was the hardest piece, or these are the 2 hardest pieces to cut. And this is a massive chunk of resin. You have to cut to adjust the, I call it the vents. You see this directly in the center of my cutting mat. You have to really cut through this like 3 centimeters wide piece of resin. I was considering doing this with a rotary tool, but I was afraid of damaging the piece. So I really did that with the saw. I wasted 2 or 3 saw blades because they snapped. So calculate a little bit more. Maybe you're not so, you're not doing this so idiotically like I did, but this is really, really tough. And I never had a model where I had to cut 3 centimeters of resin. The elevator piece here for the central section is very easy to clean up. You just scrape around the edges, remove this thin layers of resin there, and later with the elevator you won't even see these from the inside and the outside. Nonetheless, I tried to clean them up as much as possible, because at this point I had no clue how exact the fit had to be, would have to be. So yeah, something, here in this round part, this is holding the hip on the it's holding the center torso piece on the hip section. I was a little bit more careful because these parts usually tend to not fit perfectly, and I wanted to avoid any kind of resin residue, make it even harder. So yeah, that's the thing. Here's also my advice again. Do not scrabble around like a maniac with your file. Keep your finger on the part where you want to where you have the contact, to keep sharp edges, and do not, like I show you here, do not hold the file at the very end. If you do that, it will wobble around and it will just round your edges. Put your finger on the file, stabilize it, and really file in straight motions the parts you need to file. I can just emphasize this. I have seen so many great models with round edges, and it's very difficult to repair that damage later. These parts will be visible in the final build, the outside parts. So take care that you do not file them too much, or you have to polish it simply later to create a nice even surface for your primer. And if you plan to use some metal color on it, of course you have some possibility to use some weathering to disguise a few mistakes, but it's always better to work neatly from the start. With the round file, I'm more or less in circular motions, removing removing the residues. So when you have removed the big piece, you see here you still have these cross-shaped stabilizing parts of the resin. So there is really a lot of filing and sanding to do. You do not have to create an entirely flat surface, because the exhaust vents will cover the majority of it, but you have definitely to remove the parts on the outside. Now this will fit theoretically on that part, but as you can see, there is a gap, so I have to file the X-shaped residues and maybe even the exhaust vent a little bit. Of course, you can theoretically fill this with green stuff or something, but that's not necessary at this point. Just file them so thoroughly, and the main vents will fit. Yeah. Oh, sorry for the distraction. We are cultivating some tomatoes for our garden, so they have to go there. So you end up with a huge chunk of pieces, and of course you have leftovers here. You have leftover parts you missed. You have these mold lines. You have parts where you usually won't see this. You have these curved areas and maybe some rest of the cutting process. And what I do is now, you can file everything, but I want to speed up the process and use woolen and a corundum grinder for my rotary tool. I use a standard Dremel, but whatever you have available works, like Proxon or Dremel. Everything works without these things, but it just speeds up the process so much. So I use wool and leather to sand the parts. This is not too aggressive, so you won't really bite into the material, but it will also, due to the heat, create very, very shiny and smooth surfaces. You can use the corundum, usually in these kind of pink hue, or sometimes they are green or blue, to work on the more rough parts. Be very careful at the beginning, use a low setting, and really a round tool so you can really go into the edges here. And as you can see, I'm very gentle. I'm not really using a lot of pressure, because to take things away is easy, to repair the damage is very, very difficult. Corundum, not corundium, it's corundum, sorry, will work like a charm for the majority of these parts made from resin. Wool is used to really polish the parts. You have to apply a little bit more pressure on and or to increase the speed of the tool, but it gives really smooth surfaces. I will do another video soon where I will compare the different attachments for modelers. I mean, usually these things are used to polish with a paste like metal, and to grind through metal and or even wood. For us as scale modelers or Warhammer guys, you need something which is a little bit more soft and easy to use for our models. But overall, cleanup of course necessary, but I have seen much worse. So I will use these parts now as an example for you to really show you where are the critical parts. Here the round parts of the hip joint, and as you can see, I just go back and forth and it really creates a nice surface. If you want to go super detailed, you would have to fill up these little cavities you see here, but as they are metal, I will just use them and later during the painting process as simply corrosion or damage or whatsoever. With the ball joints, I use this sander as well. I want to remove as much as I can, although some of them will disappear into the joint. Especially the upper part will be still visible, and therefore take your time, remove those lines, and then you have a nice product at the end. So much for this video. I know this was the longest one. I still hope you enjoyed it. Follow for the next part, part 3. This was the basic concept. I'm now ready to wash everything. So see you in the next video. Thank you very much.